Was the Apostle Peter an actual, real, historical person that walked on the earth? Well, according to the earliest source that came before the Gospels were written, the uh, Apostle Paul, who calls himself an apostle, did testify to having met Peter. So I will go through some of these earliest texts. Paul, who wrote decades before the Gospels, is our earliest source. In his earliest letter, 1 Thessalonians, he doesn't mention any apostles, certainly not by name. But when we get to 1 Corinthians and Galatians, he does mention specifically apostles by name, Peter in particular. In Galatians 1, Paul describes how he first met Peter. But before all that happened, in Galatians 1, Paul is defending his apostleship, saying that it did not come through any man, deeming him apostle. He was not taught the gospel by anyone. He says he received it all through revelation. Then he took off to Arabia for 3 years, and it wasn't until after that that he finally went to Jerusalem to meet Peter and stayed with him for 15 days, as it says in Galatians 1:18. And it says he did meet James, the brother of the Lord. Interestingly enough, Paul, who writes early and who never met the historical Jesus in person and never claims to have, but he does say he met Peter. And that is our direct link to the historical Jesus and to the historical Peter. And he spent 15 days talking with him. We see James there in the background, so he met James. But scholars, believers, unbelievers, people would like to know, what did they talk about during those 15 days? Well, Paul says he already had his gospel revelation before that, and he doesn't claim any kind of apostolic succession. He got it all on his own. But boy, we would sure like to know what they talked about during that time. But the text says nothing. It tells us nothing about what they talked about. After that first visit, Paul says he was still unknown to the churches in Judea. And then not much connection at all. Paul is just out there preaching his own gospel. 14 years later, he says he went to Jerusalem again. This is important historically. Paul's second visit to Jerusalem, he says he met privately. This is Galatians 2:2. I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately before those who seemed influential, the gospel I proclaim among the Gentiles. This is different from the Acts 15 account where there's this big Jerusalem council meeting and all the elders. Here, Paul says in his own words, he just met privately with them. He names them and he acknowledges them as the leaders. He says in chapter 2:9, James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars. But look at the negative tone, different from the first meeting. Here he says, those who just seem to be influential, they added nothing to me. And what they are makes no difference to me. Paul believes that his message, his revelation, his gospel is what's important. And what little interaction he did have with the apostles in Jerusalem seems to take a very negative turn. The public confrontation with Peter, scholars debate whether that happened shortly before the second visit or after the second visit, but in any case, Peter had made his way up to Antioch, where Paul was based, and people from James, the brother of the Lord, had also gone up there. And so we see in Galatians 2, starting in verse 11, but when Cephas, or Cephas, came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles. But when these men from James came, he withdrew himself. Then Paul publicly, this is in verse 14, but when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews? A final historical note to make is that Paul portrays Peter as being willing to associate and eat with Gentiles. This is different from what we see of James, the brother of the Lord, who takes a more hardline stance and sends people up there to Antioch, and there they find Peter associating with Gentiles, eating with them, which historically speaking, it looks like Peter was more willing to go along with Paul's gospel. James, the brother of the Lord, not at all. So to wrap this up, Peter was a historical person that Paul said he met in person and had some exchange with, and we'll end it there for this section.